You ever laugh at something you don't understand, only to realize you're the joke? The laughter came sharp and careless, cutting through the polished quiet of the ceremony hall like it didn't belong there, a cluster of young Marines in crisp dress blues standing near the back wall, their voices low but not low enough, one of them tilting his head toward the old man by the display table, his smirk widening as he pointed with a gloved finger. "Look at that thing. That's not even regulation." The others leaned in, curiosity turning into amusement, boots shifting against the waxed floor with soft, restless scuffs, their attention fixed on the small, dull piece of metal pinned crookedly to the old man's chest. It wasn't polished, it didn't shine, it didn't carry the clean authority of official ribbons or medals. It looked like scrap, something forgotten in a drawer, something that didn't belong in a room built on precision and honor, and yet the old man stood there without moving, his posture straight despite the weight of years, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his pale blue eyes not on them but somewhere beyond, as if the room, the laughter, the quiet judgment pressing in around him were all distant noise. Corporal Ryan Ellis let out a short chuckle, stepping closer. "Sir, you know this is a formal event, right? You can't just pin random junk on your shirt and call it a medal." His tone carried that practiced edge, the kind that mimicked authority without fully understanding it. A second Marine circled slightly to the side, trying to get a better look. "Where'd you even get that? Looks like something out of a hardware store." More laughter, tighter now, feeding on itself, building confidence in the absence of resistance. The old man didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't even glance down at the object they were mocking. He simply stood there, quiet in a way that didn't feel weak, quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like a held breath that refused to be rushed. The room around them continued its slow, respectful rhythm, officers speaking in measured tones, chairs shifting softly, the distant hum of air conditioning steady and constant. But in this corner, something else was forming, something sharper, something off. Private First Class Nolan Briggs reached out, not quite touching the metal, but close enough to cast a shadow over it. "I'm serious, man, what is that supposed to be?" he said, his voice lowering just enough to sound almost curious, almost genuine, but the grin never left his face. The old man's fingers twitched once, barely noticeable, as if feeling something that wasn't there anymore, a memory brushing against the present, but still he said nothing. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks, standing several feet away, had been watching from the moment the laughter started, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. There was something about the old man that didn't fit the picture these Marines had painted in their heads, something in the stillness, something in the way he carried himself, not defensive, not offended, just certain. Brooks shifted his weight slightly, his gaze narrowing, while Ellis shook his head with a quiet scoff. "Yeah, that's what I thought," he said, straightening up, louder now, confident again. "If you're gonna wear something like that, at least have a story to back it up." The words hung there for a moment, light on the surface, but heavier underneath, and for the first time, the old man's eyes moved, not quickly, not dramatically, just a slow, steady shift until they met Ellis's, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, and carried farther than it should have. "It does have a story," he said, and then he stopped, as if that was all that needed to be said, as if the rest of it wasn't something you explained lightly. The Marines exchanged quick glances, amusement flickering again, but weaker now, thinner, like it didn't quite land the same way. Brooks felt it too, that subtle shift in the air, the kind you only noticed if you'd been around long enough to recognize it, and somewhere deep in his gut, a quiet warning began to form, telling him this wasn't what it looked like, not even close. The room did not return to normal after he said it. Something subtle had shifted, like the air pressure before a storm, and even the Marines who had been laughing a moment ago felt it without understanding why. Corporal Ryan Ellis forced a grin, trying to pull the moment back under control. "Yeah, I figured you would say that," he replied, his voice lighter than before but edged with something defensive. "So what is it then? Some kind of unofficial award?" The old man did not answer right away, his gaze steady, unreadable, as if weighing whether the question deserved anything more than silence. Private First Class Nolan Briggs let out a short breath through his nose, stepping a little closer, emboldened by the lack of immediate response. "Come on, sir, if you are going to wear it in here, at least explain it," he said, gesturing toward the metal again, his finger hovering just inches from the dull metal, "because right now it just looks like He paused, searching for the word, then shrugged. Nothing. The word landed flat, but it lingered longer than it should have. The old man's eyes dropped for a fraction of a second to the metal, and in that brief movement there was something different, not shame, not hesitation, but recognition, like someone looking at a photograph only they understood. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks took a slow step forward, not enough to interrupt, but enough to close the distance, his instincts tightening. He had seen this kind of quiet before, in places far from ceremony halls and polished floors, the kind that did not invite questions. Ellis noticed the movement and glanced back, irritation flickering across his face. "Staff Sergeant, we are just trying to figure out what this is supposed to be," he said, gesturing again, his tone sharpening slightly as if to justify himself. Brooks did not respond, his eyes still on the old man, watching for something the others could not see yet. The old man finally spoke again, his voice the same low, steady tone. "It is not supposed to be anything," he said, and that answer, simple as it was, only seemed to frustrate them more. Briggs shook his head with a quiet laugh. "That does not make any sense," he said, reaching out this time, his finger brushing lightly against the edge of the metal. A small, careless tap meant more to provoke than to inspect. The contact was brief, almost nothing, but it was enough. The old man's hand moved, not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate, gently guiding the younger man's hand away. "Do not," he said, and there was no anger in it, no raised voice, but the weight of the word settled heavier than anything that had been said so far. Briggs blinked, caught off guard, his smirk fading for a moment before returning weaker, uncertain. Ellis let out a short scoff, trying again to fill the space. "Relax, we are not going to break it," he said, but even he did not sound fully convinced. Brooks felt it clearly now, that line they had crossed without realizing it, the kind you do not see until you are already on the wrong side of it. He shifted his stance and reached subtly toward the radio clipped at his belt, his thumb hovering over the button, not pressing yet, just ready, because something about this was no longer a simple misunderstanding. The old man adjusted the metal slightly, his fingers careful, almost respectful, as if the object itself carried more than its appearance suggested, and when he looked back up, his eyes were no longer distant, they were present, focused, and for the first time, there was something behind them that made Brooks's chest tighten, not fear, not exactly, but recognition of something older, something earned. Ellis opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, a voice cut in from across the room, sharp and authoritative. "What is going on here?" And the tone alone was enough to pull every head in that direction as Lieutenant Ethan Cole approached, his posture rigid, his expression already set, and whatever this moment had been, it was about to become something else entirely. Lieutenant Ethan Cole did not slow down as he crossed the polished floor, his shoes striking with sharp, controlled steps that carried authority before he said a single word. His eyes moved quickly across the small cluster, taking in the Marines, the tension, and finally settling on the old man. "I asked a question," he said, his voice firm, not raised, but carrying enough weight to silence the last traces of laughter. Corporal Ryan Ellis straightened immediately, the confidence returning to his posture now that rank had entered the space. "Sir, we were just addressing a uniform issue," he said, gesturing toward the metal with a slight tilt of his head. "That item is not regulation," and he refused to explain it. Cole's gaze shifted to the metal, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly as he studied the small, dull piece of metal, then back to the old man. "Sir, this is a formal military event," he said, his tone controlled, practiced. "If you are going to display any form of insignia, it needs to meet regulation standards. Do you understand that?" The old man met his eyes without hesitation, his voice calm, steady. "I understand," he said, "but this is not for display." The answer hung in the air, simple, but not compliant. Ellis shifted slightly, sensing the opening. "That is what we were trying to clarify, sir," he added quickly. "He will not identify it, and it does not appear to be authorized." Cole nodded once, slow, as if confirming something already decided in his mind. He took a step closer to the old man, closing the distance in a way that was meant to assert control. "Then let me be clear," he said, his voice dropping just enough to sharpen the edge. "If it is not authorized, it does not belong here." The room seemed to tighten around those words, conversations in the distance fading further as attention quietly drifted toward the unfolding exchange. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks felt his jaw set, the pressure building behind his calm expression. But he still held back, waiting, watching. The old man did not move, did not reach for the medal, did not argue. He simply stood there, absorbing the directive without visible reaction, which only seemed to harden Cole's stance. "Sir, I am going to ask you one more time," Cole continued, his posture rigid. "Remove it, or you will need to leave the ceremony." There it was, clear, direct, leaving no room for interpretation. Ellis glanced sideways at Briggs, a faint smirk returning as if the situation had finally corrected itself, authority restored, order maintained. The old man's eyes shifted briefly toward the medal, his fingers brushing against it for the second time, slower now, more deliberate, as if confirming something only he could feel, and then he looked back at Cole, his voice unchanged. "Then you should call your commander," he said, and the sentence landed differently than anything else that had been said so far, not defiant, not emotional, just certain, absolute. Cole's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, confusion mixing with irritation. "That is not how this works," he replied, sharper now. "You are already being given the opportunity to comply." The old man did not respond immediately, his gaze steady, unblinking, the silence stretching just long enough to make the air feel heavier. Brooks felt it again, stronger this time, that quiet warning turning into something undeniable. His thumb pressed lightly against the radio button at his belt, still not activating it, but no longer hesitating. Ellis exhaled through his nose, impatience creeping back in. "Sir, with respect, we are wasting time," he said. "We can escort him out and resolve this." Cole gave a small nod, his decision forming. "That will not be necessary," he said, his tone final. "Sir, remove the item." The old man's hand closed gently around the medal, not pulling it away, not hiding it, just holding it, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the same quiet weight. "It does not come off," and in that moment, something in the room shifted again, deeper this time, something none of the young Marines could name, but all of them felt, like a line had just been drawn that could not be stepped back from. For a brief second, no one moved. The words lingered in the air like something heavier than a simple refusal, and Lieutenant Ethan Cole felt it before he could explain it, that subtle shift in control, the kind that did not come from rank or uniform, but from something older, something earned. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer, closing the final gap between them. "That is not your decision to make," he said, his voice lower now, sharper, each word placed with precision. "You are in a controlled environment, and you will follow protocol." The old man did not step back, did not raise his voice, did not change his posture. He simply stood there, the medal still resting between his fingers, as if the conversation was happening on a different level than the one Cole was trying to enforce. Corporal Ryan Ellis shifted his weight again, the earlier confidence returning in small bursts, fed by the presence of authority. "Sir, we can handle this," he said, glancing at Briggs, who gave a small nod, ready to step in, ready to end it, to restore the order they understood. Cole lifted a hand slightly, stopping them without looking, his focus still locked on the old man. "Last warning," he said, and this time there was no softness in it, no room left for interpretation. The surrounding conversations had nearly faded to nothing now, a quiet circle forming around the moment as more eyes turned, drawn by the tension that no longer needed volume to be felt. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks felt his pulse slow instead of rise, a different kind of readiness settling in, the kind that came before something irreversible. His thumb pressed down, just enough to activate the radio at his belt, but he kept his voice low, almost a whisper into the receiver. "This is Brooks. I need command verification on a name," he said, his eyes never leaving the old man. "Arthur Hale." There was a brief pause, static, then a response beginning to form, but Brooks did not wait for it fully. He already knew what was coming, because the room itself had already told him this was not a mistake. Back in front of him, Lieutenant Cole extended his hand toward the medal, not grabbing, not forceful, but deliberate, the gesture of someone expecting compliance. "Remove it," he said again, quieter now, but somehow heavier. The old man looked down at the hand, then back up at Cole, and for the first time there was a faint change in his expression, not anger, not defiance, but something like recognition, as if he had seen this moment before in a different time, under a different sky. His voice came again, steady as ever. "You should not touch that." The warning was simple, almost gentle, but it landed with a weight that made Ellis hesitate for just a fraction of a second, long enough to feel it, not understand it, just feel it. Cole did not pull his hand back, his patience thinning under the surface. "I am not asking again," he said, and his fingers moved the final inch, brushing against the edge of the metal. The contact was light, controlled, but in that instant, something invisible seemed to ripple through the moment. The old man's hand tightened, not pulling away, not striking, just holding the metal firmly in place, as if anchoring it to something far beyond the fabric of his shirt. Brooks heard the voice on the radio finally break through, sharper now, urgent, asking for confirmation, repeating the name back with a tone that did not belong in routine communication, and Brooks answered with a single word, confirmed, his eyes narrowing as the pieces fell into place faster than the situation could contain them. Around them, the room held its breath, not in fear, but in that strange, collective pause that comes right before the truth arrives and changes everything. The moment his fingers made contact, the room seemed to tilt, not physically, but in something deeper, something felt rather than seen, and Lieutenant Ethan Cole felt it first, a faint hesitation that slipped through his certainty before he could suppress it. The metal was colder than expected, not just in temperature, but in presence, as if it carried something that did not belong to this room. His hand paused for half a second longer than it should have, long enough for Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks to hear the change in the voice coming through his radio, no longer routine, no longer calm. "Say again the name," the voice demanded, sharper now, carrying urgency that did not fit the situation Brooks had described. Brooks kept his tone low, controlled. "Arthur Hale," he repeated, his eyes still fixed on the scene unfolding in front of him. There was a brief silence on the line, not static, not confusion, but recognition, the kind that hits before words catch up. Then the response came. Tighter, faster, stand by, do not escalate, I repeat, do not escalate. Brooks felt the confirmation settle in his chest, solid and undeniable. Back in front of him, Cole withdrew his hand slowly, not because he had been stopped, but because something in that brief contact had unsettled him in a way he could not justify. He straightened, reclaiming his posture, his authority. But it did not sit the same as it had seconds before. Corporal Ryan Ellis noticed it too, even if he could not name it. The slight delay, the hesitation, it chipped at the confidence he had been holding on to. "Sir?" Ellis prompted, quieter now, waiting for the order that would resolve everything, restore the clear lines they understood. Cole did not answer immediately, his eyes returning to the metal, studying it again, this time not as a violation, but as a question he had not expected to ask. "Where did you get it?" he said finally, the words coming out differently than before, less command, more demand for clarity. The old man's gaze did not waver. "It was given," he replied, his voice even, "a long time ago." Ellis exhaled, a short, frustrated breath. "That does not make it authorized," he said, but the edge in his voice was gone, replaced by something uncertain, something thinner. Brooks shifted slightly, bringing the radio closer to his ear as the voice returned again, more controlled now but still carrying weight. "Who is in charge on site?" Brooks answered immediately, "Lieutenant Ethan Cole." Another pause, shorter this time, then the response, clear, direct, "Tell him to hold position, command is en route." Brooks's eyes flicked up, locking onto Cole, measuring the distance between what was happening and what was about to arrive, and for the first time since the exchange began, he stepped forward fully, closing the gap. His presence no longer passive. "Sir," Brooks said, his tone respectful but firm, cutting cleanly through the tension. Cole turned toward him, irritation flashing briefly at the interruption. "What is it, Staff Sergeant?" Brooks met his gaze without hesitation. "We have command inbound," he said, choosing each word carefully. "They advised we hold position." The words landed heavier than they sounded, and Cole felt it. The shift of control moving again, not away from him, but above him. Ellis glanced between them, confusion tightening his expression. "Command?" "For this?" he asked under his breath, but no one answered him, because in that moment, the situation had outgrown him, had outgrown all of them, and the old man stood exactly where he had been from the start, unmoved, the metal resting quietly against his chest, no longer looking like nothing, not to anyone who was paying attention. And as the silence settled once more, it carried a different weight now, not uncertainty, not tension, but anticipation, the kind that builds when something Important is about to step into the room and make everything that came before it make sense. The minutes did not pass normally after that, they stretched, thinned, each second carrying more weight than the last, and the ceremony hall, once filled with quiet conversation and measured movement, now felt suspended in something unspoken. Lieutenant Ethan Cole stood straighter than before, but the confidence in his posture had shifted into something more rigid, more controlled. As if he was holding the moment in place rather than leading it, his eyes moved once more to the old man, studying him in silence, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he had been told, but the two no longer aligned. Corporal Ryan Ellis shifted beside him, the earlier smirk gone entirely now, replaced by a tight jaw and a gaze that no longer lingered comfortably on the metal. He looked instead toward the entrance, as if expecting something, though he did not know what. Private First Class Nolan Briggs stood a step back, quieter than before, his hands clasped behind his back, the careless energy drained from his stance, replaced by the uneasy stillness of someone realizing they may have misread the situation entirely. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks remained where he was, his radio now silent, but his attention sharper than ever, every instinct focused forward, because he knew what that tone on the other end meant. He had heard it before, not often, but enough to recognize when something routine had just become something else entirely. Across the room, conversations had not resumed, they had simply lowered, voices dropping into whispers, eyes drifting back again and again toward the small cluster at the center of it all, drawn not by spectacle, but by the absence of it, by the quiet that did not belong. The old man stood exactly as he had from the beginning. Unchanged, his hand no longer gripping the metal tightly, but resting near it, as if its presence required no further defense. His gaze moved once toward the far wall, not searching, not waiting, just aware, like someone who understood timing in a way the others did not. Then it came, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable, the sound of the main doors opening, a subtle shift in the air as heads turned almost in unison. Conversations stopping entirely now, not out of command, but instinct, a presence entering that did not need to announce itself. The footsteps that followed were measured, deliberate, not hurried, but carrying a clarity of purpose that cut through the room more effectively than any raised voice could. Brooks exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as the final piece settled into place. He did not need to turn fully to know who had arrived, but he did anyway, his posture adjusting, his shoulders aligning, the small signals of respect that came automatically when recognition met authority. Lieutenant Cole felt it too, before he saw it, the shift in attention, the way the room itself seemed to reorient, and when he turned, the controlled certainty he had been holding on to slipped just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath it, because this was no longer his situation to manage. The distance between the entrance and their position felt longer than it was, each step of the approaching figure drawing the tension tighter, not breaking it, not releasing it, but focusing it, until it narrowed down to a single point. The old man did not turn immediately, he did not need to, he simply stood there, as if the arrival behind him was something expected, something already accounted for, and when he finally shifted his gaze slightly toward the approaching presence, there was no surprise in it, no reaction at all, just the quiet acknowledgement of something inevitable. And in that moment, every Marine in that corner of the room understood, without anyone saying it, that whatever happened next was going to redefine everything they thought they had just witnessed. The man who entered did not need an introduction, his presence carried it for him. Conversations died completely as he moved forward, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked. His uniform was immaculate, his rank unmistakable, and the air around him seemed to tighten with every step. Lieutenant Ethan Cole straightened instinctively, his spine locking into place as recognition hit, sharper than anything he had felt so far. "Sir," he said, the word coming out tighter than intended, but the man did not respond immediately. His eyes had already found the old man standing at the center of the moment, and everything else faded behind that focus. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks snapped fully to attention now, no hesitation, no uncertainty, just precise respect, because he understood exactly who had just walked into the room, and more importantly, why. Corporal Ryan Ellis followed a beat too late, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by the rigid stillness of someone trying to correct a mistake that had already happened. The commander stopped a few feet away, not addressing Cole, not acknowledging the Marines, his gaze fixed entirely on Arthur Hale, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, thick and absolute, until the commander took one final step forward and looked down, not at the man, but at the metal resting against his chest. His expression changed, subtly, but unmistakably. Something behind his eyes shifting from command to recognition, from authority to something deeper, something personal. He reached out, slower than Cole had, deliberate in a different way, and this time, when his fingers touched the edge of the metal, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only confirmation. He exhaled once, steady, controlled, as if something long buried had just resurfaced in a single instant. Then he looked up, meeting Arthur Hale's eyes, and the room felt it, that exchange, silent, but heavier than any order that had been given all day. "Where did you get this?" the commander asked, but his tone carried none of the doubt Cole had used earlier. It was not a challenge, it was a question he already knew the answer to. Arthur Hale held his gaze, unchanged. "You gave it to me," he said, and the words did not echo, they settled, solid, undeniable. The commander did not react outwardly, but something in his posture shifted, a fraction, enough for Brooks to see it, enough to understand the weight of what had just been confirmed. Lieutenant Cole felt it too, the ground beneath his authority shifting again, not collapsing, but being replaced by something larger, something he had not been aware of until now. Ellis's eyes moved quickly between them, confusion tightening into something closer to concern, because this was no longer a situation he could interpret. It had moved beyond rules, beyond protocol, into something that did not come from manuals or training. The commander straightened slowly, his gaze moving from Arthur Hale to the Marines around him, and for the first time since he had entered, he acknowledged the rest of the room, not with anger, not with raised voice, but with a calm that carried more weight than either. "Stand still," he said, and the command did not need to be repeated. Every Marine in the room locked into place, not out of fear, but out of instinct, because something in his tone made it clear that this moment was not routine, not disciplinary, but something else entirely, something that was about to be understood whether they were ready for it or not. The silence held after the command, not fragile, not uncertain, but firm, like something set into place that could not be moved. Every Marine stood exactly where they were, shoulders squared, eyes forward, the kind of stillness that came from instinct rather than instruction, and in the center of it, the commander took one slow step closer to Arthur Hale, his gaze never leaving the metal. "They asked you what it was," he said, his voice calm, steady, carrying clearly across the room without effort. "They were wrong to ask the question that way." Lieutenant Ethan Cole felt the words land before he fully understood them, his jaw tightening slightly as he remained at attention, the weight of the moment pressing heavier with each passing second. The commander turned slightly, just enough to include the Marines in his line of sight without breaking focus. "This," he continued, lifting his hand and gently touching the edge of the metal again, "is not something you measure against regulation." His fingers rested there for a moment, not examining, not testing, but acknowledging. "It is not issued, it is not recorded, and you will not find it in any manual you have ever read." Corporal Ryan Ellis felt his throat tighten, the earlier confidence completely gone now, replaced by a quiet realization that he had misjudged something far beyond his understanding. Private First Class Nolan Briggs stared straight ahead, but his focus had narrowed, his mind replaying the moment his hand had touched the metal, the casual gesture that now felt heavier than he could process. The commander withdrew his hand slowly and straightened, his eyes moving back to Arthur Hale. 40 years ago, he said, his voice lowering slightly, not softer, but deeper, carrying a weight that changed the room again. "There was a night when everything went wrong." The words did not rush, they unfolded, deliberate, each one placed with care. Communications failed, positions shifted, and the line we thought we understood disappeared. No one moved, no one spoke, even the distant sounds of the building seemed to fade, as if the story itself demanded space. And in that moment, the commander continued, "There was a man who did not ask for orders, did not wait for clarity, he just stayed where he needed to be." His gaze held steady on Arthur Hale, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in it, respect that did not need to be stated, only recognized. "This metal," he said, looking briefly down at it again, "was never meant to be worn." He paused, letting that settle. "It was meant to be remembered." The words carried through the room, quiet, but absolute. Lieutenant Cole felt the shift fully now, the structure he had relied on no longer applying, replaced by something that required understanding rather than enforcement. Brooks stood motionless, but his eyes had softened slightly, not in emotion, but in recognition of a truth that had just been spoken out loud. The commander turned fully now, facing the Marines, his posture unchanged, but his presence filling the space in a different way. "You saw something you did not recognize," he said, "and you treated it like it did not matter." No accusation, no raised voice, but the statement carried more weight than either. Ellis felt the words settle in his chest, heavier than any correction he had received before, because this was not about discipline, it was about something deeper, something he had overlooked. The commander let the silence return for a brief moment, then spoke again. "It matters," and this time, there was no need for anything more. No one moved after that, not because they were ordered to, but because something in the room had settled into a truth that made movement feel out of place. The commander let the silence hold just long enough for it to become part of the moment, then he turned back to Arthur Hale, his posture straight, his expression no longer just authoritative, but respectful in a way that did not need explanation, and without hesitation, he brought his hand up in a clean, precise motion and rendered a formal salute, the kind that was not given lightly, the kind that carried weight far beyond ceremony. The room felt it instantly, the shift, the meaning, and one by one, almost instinctively, every Marine followed. Lieutenant Ethan Cole first, his movement sharp but slower than usual, as if aware that this salute was not routine. Corporal Ryan Ellis next, his hand rising with a tight, controlled motion, the earlier confidence replaced by something quieter, something more grounded. Private First Class Nolan Briggs mirrored the action, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed forward, but his thoughts clearly elsewhere. The entire room aligned in silence, no commands, no repetition, just understanding. Arthur Hale did not return the salute immediately. He looked at the commander for a brief moment, his pale blue eyes steady, then he lifted his hand, slower, deliberate, returning the gesture with the same quiet precision. And when it ended, no one dropped their posture right away, as if the moment itself needed to settle before they could move again. The commander lowered his hand first, stepping slightly to the side, not out of command, but out of respect, creating space where there had been none before. "You may stay," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a finality that required no confirmation. Lieutenant Cole nodded once, a small, controlled movement, but inside, something had shifted permanently. The structure he had relied on had not been broken, it had been expanded. Ellis exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way that felt heavier than relief, more like realization. Briggs remained still for a second, longer than the others before relaxing, his eyes flicking once toward the metal, not with curiosity now, but with something closer to respect. Brooks allowed himself the smallest shift in stance, the tension easing, but his gaze remained on Arthur Hale, acknowledging without words what had just unfolded. The ceremony began to move again, slowly, carefully, as if the room itself needed to recalibrate. Conversations returned in low tones, but none of them carried the same casual weight as before. Something had changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Arthur Hale adjusted the metal once more, his fingers light, almost absent, then he stepped forward into the space that had been made for him. No hesitation, no need for acknowledgement, just presence, and as he moved, the Marines who had stood in his way only minutes before shifted subtly, creating a path without being asked, their movements quiet, deliberate, respectful, and in the stillness that followed, the lesson settled deeper than any command ever could. Not spoken again, not repeated, just understood. That respect is not something you assign by rank or regulation, it is something you recognize, often too late, in the silence after you have already misjudged it.